Well, if they're all different, it matters. Oh, hi. Hi. Hi there. That's loud.
Oh, you.
I'll let someone else get from here.
Yeah,
What?
just waiting for everybody to get seated before we start.
All right. Oh, okay. This works. All right. I think we are ready to get started here. Hello. Welcome to the Fantasy Flight Games panel, all about KeyForge and unique games. My name is Brooke Robison. I'm the marketing writer for KeyForge, and I will be your moderator today. I am joined by some of our wonderful team who were instrumental in bringing this wonderful game to life. So we've got Brad Andrews.
How's it going, guys?
Mercedes Opine. Daniel Lovett-Clark. And Andy Christensen. So the plan for today is that we'll start by having our panelists discuss the game, the story of its creation, giving us a little peek behind the curtain, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So to kick us off here, how about each of you introduce yourselves and tell us what role you played in developing KeyForge.
So I'm Brad Andrews. I've been a card game developer for Fantasy Flight Games for about 8 years now, and I'm the lead developer for KeyForge.
Yeah.
I'm Mercedes, and I'm Brad's boss. Yeah. No, I'm the card game team manager for all of Fantasy Flight, so that includes, like, you know, Destiny and all of our LCGs. It's a good time.
I'm Dan. Wow, what do I do?
What don't you do?
Do it all.
I was a key part of crafting the story and the setting for this game, which was a unique challenge because it is a very strange game.
All of the wacky ideas, you know, this guy, idea guy.
Yeah. I'm Andy Christensen. I'm a senior art director at Fantasy Flight Games. I've been there for, I guess, 7 years now.
Been there longer than that.
Maybe it's going on 8. Yeah. And I had the privilege of working on KeyForge alongside another art director and bringing it to life visually.
Okay, so we've prepared a little bit of a presentation for you guys. So let's see how good I am at technology. Not good.
Made it go away.
Ah. So, Brad?
Yeah.
Away?
So do you want to click us on to the next slide?
Oh, here we go.
So first, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Brooke. That was fantastic. Let's hear it for Brooke. So before we really jump into a panel discussion, we wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about what KeyForge is. And then afterwards we'll have some time for some audience questions. So here we go. Onward. So, KeyForge is the world's first unique deck game. It's designed by legendary game designer Richard Garfield, who some of you guys might have heard of him. But what is a unique deck game? So a unique deck game means that, well, literally every single deck in the world is unique. What does that mean? Well, it means that there's over 104 quadrillion different combinations of decks. That means that if we made every single deck possible, every single person on the planet would be able to have 32 billion unique decks, all of their own. But what makes a deck unique? Each deck consists of 36 cards. These cards aren't individually unique, but the combination of them that are in your deck is. In addition to that, there is an Archon card. Now, this Archon card is really important because every single card in your deck has the same art that this Archon card does, and that art is wholly unique to every single deck. That includes many of the ones that you can see up here. In addition to that, every single deck has a unique name that's made by our in-house name generator. Wholly unique in the world. But if we want to talk a little bit about the gameplay of the game, and we can move on to the next slide. Oh, too far? No. Oh, my bad. Anyways, we'll talk about the gameplay. It's fine. At its heart, KeyForge is a racing game. You're trying to race your opponent to be the first to forge 3 keys. In order to do that, you're going to need to collect a mysterious substance called amber. Now, in order to collect amber, you're going to need to be playing cards or reaping with creatures in play. Now, at the same time, you can also use your creatures in play to fight your opponent's creatures to limit their ability to gain amber. Now, each deck in KeyForge is also special in that it is made of 3 different houses, 3 factions. And on each and every one of your turns, you're going to be selecting one of those 3 factions to be your active house. Now, you are only allowed to play, use, or discard cards from that active house. But what is the Crucible? The Crucible is the IP that we've worked on, the intellectual property of KeyForge, and it is all set on a planet called the Crucible. Now, the Crucible is an artificial world made from the bits and pieces of thousands and, well, millions, really, of planets from throughout the universe. Now, all these pieces of these planets have been amalgamated together into this kind of strange planet where all these different peoples and races and creatures and artifacts and crazy bits of technology have come together. And on that world, we find many different houses. The first of which is Brobnar. There it is. So, Brobnar is our giant techno-barbarian faction. They form up into clans based on their propensity for battle and the way they like to fight, and the shared oral history that carries back many generations. Some say they've been on the Crucible all along, but it's still up for debate. But not only are they, techno-barbarians warring their way across in a Mad Max-like fashion, they're also artisans and really focus on building really interesting bits of technology that are both loud and dangerous. Mechanically, they love to fight, and they reward you for getting into scraps with your opponent. Our next faction lives below the surface of the Crucible and is known as Beasts. These are insectoid, demonoid creatures that like to kidnap and take dwellers on the surface down below and to feed on their emotions. They capture them in bits of amber and use them to do something. It's pretty mysterious, and a lot of Logotarians have spent a long time trying to figure it out and failing. Mechanically, this is about control. It's about harrying your opponent, hitting them where it hurts, and doing it over and over again until they can't move anymore. Next, my personal favorite faction, the Logos. These are the mad scientists, the science for science sake, more asking if they can rather whether they should. They're mostly cybernetic. In fact, they don't even remember, for the most part, what their actual bodies looked like before they became cybernetic. Many other people, the most intelligent members of the Crucible, are often welcomed into the Logos, slowly becoming like them. Mechanically, the Logos are about drawing cards. They're about possibilities. They're about rounding out your ability to do things and giving you untold possibilities. Next, we have Mars, which, well, they're Martians. They're inspired by H.G. Wells, and they've been transported directly from Mars to the Crucible after having destroyed the environment on Mars. They're very xenophobic and don't generally play well with others, though that's mostly the Martian elders telling the soldiers, hey, don't play well with others. And some follow, but many are slowly integrating into life on the Crucible. Mechanically, well, they work well with themselves. They benefit from having more Martian cards in your hand and in play, and give you new possibilities based on that. Next, we have the Sanctum, which are these angelic knights that live in floating cities above the surface of the crucible. They are kind of a monistic order of knights, and they are led by spirits, energy beings that are bound to the suits of armor that we can see. And the idea is that if you are a mortal, a flesh-bodied member of the sanctum, that you may eventually become enlightened and become a being of pure energy. Mechanically, they're very strong and hard to damage, and they're all about taking away your opponent's amber and holding it, capturing it until they are eventually destroyed. Next, another personal favorite of mine is the Shadows, the thieves, assassins, and thugs of the Crucible. They primarily consist of a race called Svar Elves. They're these, well, cute guys you can see there that have formed a really strong, tightly bound community around stealing amber. Obviously, their main mechanic is about stealing from their opponent, their artifacts, whatever they can get their hands on. And last but not least is Untamed. This faction represents all of the wild things that live in the Crucible, all of the different beasts, you know, the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, that have come from all these untold planets and kind of found a new home on the Crucible, at the same time working amber into their very bodies, mutating them into new forms. Along with those creatures, we find strange witches and other wild machines that have taken to a more primal life. Mechanically, Untamed is the best faction at gaining amber, just quickly and as fast as they can, in addition to having very strong-bodied creatures. But with that introduction, I think we're ready for some questions. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, Brad. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, you can line up and we will be taking them. We'll have a wonderful helper right there with a microphone. But let's start with just some general questions.
That's great.
Okay, so what about the concept of a unique game appealed to each of you?
Am I going first?
Yeah.
All right.
I was just talking.
Well, this particular game, I just love the idea of being able to pick up a deck and play, and not having to, work with, necessarily deck building, and just the idea of discovering what's in this new deck I opened and how it works. So,
I think for me, it's about having something that is mine alone. Like when I play miniatures games or role-playing games or whatever, I never want to take the already established factions. I always want to try and like make my own thing that nobody else has done. So for me, that's important and interesting.
Well, I think the unique concept is wonderful for many reasons. One of them is overcoming that barrier to entry that Andy was mentioning that often comes with deck building games. But more than that, it's kind of cool just to be able to open a deck, not know what's in it, but be a good enough player that you can just roll in there and feel confident finding the combos and learning all that stuff in ways that players don't typically get to experience. And it also takes away that thing that happens with card games where you have deck building, where there's a meta created specifically around those cards. And when you go to the tournament scene, you get a lot of net decking and whatnot. So even though you're like, yeah, I'm building my deck, sometimes it can be exactly the same as somebody else's deck, and this completely changes that experience.
For me, I'd have to say that the unique game concept is so intriguing just because when you pick up a deck and you open it for the first time and you're really getting to learn how that deck functions, and your experience from the first play with the deck to the 10th play with the deck to the 20th of the play of the deck is always changing, and that ability to acquire that mastery, that love, game designers throw around the term grok a lot, and that means to understand to the point of loving. And I feel that so strongly with KeyForge. I pick up a deck and after a good number of plays, I just grok it.
Wow, very cool. Thank you, guys. So,
Hello. First, just congratulations on such an awesome game. I haven't felt
thank
this
you.
way about a game
Thank you.
in a really long time. Opening the decks, it brings back a lot of nostalgia of opening those old booster packs. I haven't done that since the 90s, and it has a very, just a really cool feeling. My question was about the keys, the different colored keys. Is that going to be in play later on in the future of the game, or?
I think it's a really, really cool aspect that we've left open.
Okay.
I can't promise anything on that end, but I'm really intrigued by the space personally, and I think I'd really like to do something in that area.
Thank you.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi.
For people that don't know, can you cover the chains and the handicap stuff? And then on top of that, can you explain how you guys are either preventing or mitigating in organized play someone fixing themselves up so they have a lot of chains and then they go to a tournament and just roll over people?
Yeah. So the chain mechanic is one that we've implemented to help balance out any of the, balance woes that can come with a game that's as crazy as this. When two players sit down and play with two decks, our rulebook currently has some rules that allow them to assign chains to one of the decks. Now, chains restrict a player's ability to draw cards into their hand. For the first 6 chains that a player has, they'll draw 1 less card, so on and so forth for every iteration of 6 after that, up to 24. But that doesn't matter too much, but it's more the fact that a chain is that lowering of your potential for every turn. So even a deck that has a higher potential in their cards may now have a lower potential in their ability to draw, which can really help provide balance.
Yeah, so in the sense of organized play, if you're at your local game store and you're going weekly and you've got a deck that's a star performer and it's just doing really well and everybody's like, wow, this deck's so amazing, and then you sit down and you play little Timmy and you're constantly stomping poor little Timmy, that's not going to be a very good experience for him. So what the chains allow us to do is we can take that in-game mechanic and apply it to a deck so that the entire time that you're playing with that deck, you're playing with fewer cards. And what that does is it gives a little bit of balance to the game, so it doesn't make it such a bad play feel if you have any sort of discrepancy in the power level of a deck.
But I guess my question is, if you purposely go the opposite way, and you come in with a weak deck that you know is actually very powerful in organized play, how do you prevent that person from then steamrolling
The more that you play that deck, like the first time you come in, and mind you, these are all at store level. And so what this is it's just to keep an even playing field for the store. So if you come in with a deck and it's untested, like nobody knows what that performance is going to be, you might secretly be like, ha ha ha, this is going to be a great deck. You can come in and you can play that deck, but the first time you win a store event with that deck, you're going to get a chain, and so on and so forth. So the more that you keep bringing it, the more chains it's going to get, but it's also going to be recognized as being more powerful. So there is a little bit of prestige in playing with that chain deck. Now, when we start going to national events and things like that, it's a completely different thing. You can come with the most powerful deck ever. Those chains aren't going to necessarily restrict your performance in those bigger events. It's just to keep things friendly and balanced at a store level.
Specifically our store level tournaments, I believe we're calling them chain-bound tournaments.
Correct.
So, 2 questions. He actually just asked half of mine, but one, so from go smaller than store level, so 2 people playing here, is there going to be a mechanic for us to be able to report stuff so that you can have a deck that doesn't roll all of my friends all the time? You know what I mean?
So the rulebook actually supports out of tournament level play chains. They give some suggested guidance. Generally, if I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's generally a good spot to start assigning 4 chains to a deck that's been stomping your opponents, and then adjusting from there based on, I believe it's 3 wins, then adding up chains.
So the other part of my question, which is probably more interesting to everyone, is what have you guys done from the algorithmic generation of decks to help balance what's going on and make sure that you don't have a deck that's just a dud Because I'm sure certain combinations of cards are going to be more powerful than other combinations. I'm curious what's going on behind the scenes in initially generating the decks for that.
So design-wise, we focus a lot on trying to make cards, and every single card in some way, be useful. Typically, a more conditional card will have amber on it, so even if you just play it, you're still getting an amber, which is great. That's one step closer. I mean, if we look at it in the sense of, in order to win a game of KeyForge, you need to get 18 victory points, and each amber is a victory point. Just being able to play one of the cards in your deck and get a victory point is still a good card.
Yeah, and that's come up with, Mavericks that show up and they're out of house, and then you're like, okay, wait a minute, this is only good for human creatures, but I don't have any Sanctum or humans in my deck at all. Well, hey, at least I get to put it out on the table and I get that amber.
So we've taken that strategy with a lot of design level stuff. We also have a lot of restrictions inside the algorithm that help create more synergistic decks, prevent any particular card that we deem being too powerful from going too crazy. Like, I'm sure people have noticed that you've only ever seen one library access in a deck. There's a reason for that. And so we test those powerful cards and we become aware of their presence, but we don't want to say, no, you can't have powerful cards, because I don't know if you guys ever played like a game or something, but powerful cards are really fun. And so we want to be able to put that power in your hands. Now, so when we're designing, if you think of all the decks that exist in a bell curve, we tried to pull the sides of that bell curve out and even out that middle ground so that there's more decks that are competitive against one another. Mm-hmm. And that gives you a wider field of decks that you can have great experiences against, especially when you're playing in a small play group.
Hi, so his question was very similar to mine in terms of balancing, but does, by balancing and creating those limitations in the bell curve and everything like that, you're reducing the possible combinations of cards? Do you foresee that reducing to such a point where you're going to have any issues?
104 quadrillion.
Well, no, I understand.
Actually,
that,
to be more specific, I'm going to throw this word out here because I had to learn it, okay? It's called Novemvigitillion. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that term. I wasn't. I had to totally look it up.
Sounds like a good
to
card. Yeah. You made that up, didn't you?
So what that is 10 to the 90th power, which if you were to take just the cards, the card pool that is in set 1, and say, hey, this is 36 card decks. That's what we want to make. Mm-hmm. Just with those numbers alone, without any other clamping stuff going on in the algorithm, we were able to come up with 256 Novemvigitillion possibilities for deck combinations. So the likelihood of us running into any,
Sure. I think we'd probably run out of paper before we'd run out of decks.
Yeah, maybe not enough paper.
And that's fair. And so from that perspective, though, and because of the algorithmic combinations and limitations, how hard is it going to be to introduce expansions and further things like that? Do you know?
It's been really interesting working with that. We don't have anything we can say yet, but we have a lot of exciting stuff coming down the pipe, and you're just going to have to pay attention. I really wish I could talk about it.
I mean, truthfully, the more stuff that we introduce into the pool just increases the rarity further and further.
It just makes the game more dynamic, too, for what you can discover and what you can expect to see.
Exactly.
It makes our tech team cry.
It's hard, the game.
There's a really funny note about that, because I was actually talking to our tech team coming out here just so that I made sure that I knew how to use words like Novemvigitillion. But when they created the algorithm, they made it specifically ultra flexible so Brad can't break it. Like, they're like, go ahead, Brad, do your worst.
Brad's going to break it.
I've tried. I mean, like, we have a weekly meeting with the tech team, and whenever I have a new crazy idea, you can just see them groaning, just being like, what do we have to do this week?
They're ready for it, though. They're experts.
Hi, my name is Doug. My group and I have really been enjoying the pod play downstairs.
Oh, thank you.
Awesome.
Everyone
Hi, Doug.
has it, and really nice job with the product. My question is about the biomatrix backup controversy. Not to rehash it or to question the decision in the FAQ, the version 1.1 FAQ, but more just to note that there was an ambiguity on one of the cards, and it was highly discussed on online forums, and the ruling was anticipated. And then after it was made, there was, for many, not everyone, but for many, some frustration about how it seemed to be counterintuitive to how people would read the card and understand the card. And my question is, do you track those community conversations, and how do you go about knowing that there's such high anticipation making decisions on card ambiguity?
And it's a very tough topic, because we have internal design principles that obviously I can't share with you about exactly how we go about making our rulings. And this is one that was unfortunate where it ended up, but it's a ruling I stand by. It's what we have to do in order to make the game continue to function and not break down. Consistency at its core is key. And we definitely track and watch. We're always listening and learning. We wouldn't be doing our jobs if we weren't. So we pay very close attention to the community. So we did not make that decision lightly. We listened to all sides of the arguments. We sat down with the rules, and it was a very, very long conversation, but this is where we ended up, and I stick by my decision.
Hello, so this is my first exposure to this game at all. I haven't seen any cards, opened anything, and I was hoping you could explain, sorry if this is immediately obvious to anybody who actually opens a deck. So what's stopping people at the national level or the higher level from all coming in with the same best deck? Like the best cards?
From the idea that they're continually opening packs looking for the best cards?
Yes.
Nothing. I mean, other than that there's multiple different strategies that really thrive and counter each other present. My goodness.
Somebody's having a party.
That counter each other. And so, you know, there is some natural sense of a metagame, but not in the same way that it is a completely community-determined metagame. It is what is playing well for people metagame. And I personally have certain houses that I feel I function best with, and I win the most with. And so I tend to lean toward those. Now, those are different than what Mercedes does well with, what Dan does well with, what Andy does well with.
I don't do well with many.
Don't listen to him. He beat me just last night. But, you know, to Brad's point, the thing is the different aspects of every game are going to appeal to different gamers. Some people have different play styles. Some people like that little steely, ambery kind of thing. Some people like big, stompy creatures. And so people are going to kind of relate to those in various ways. And so there's, contrary to popular belief, I feel like you cannot just look at a deck list and be like, this is going to be an amazing deck, because that may or may not be true. It can be true in certain cases, but you might run into a deck that makes it, like, for instance, I opened a deck that had almost no creatures, and I was like, what the heck, blah, 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 blah. But then I played more with that. Yeah, it was super great. It sounded just like that. Blah, 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 blah. Anyway, but through playing that deck, the more I played it, the more I was forced to come up with different strategies to make it effective. And it's very easy, because there's so many different strategies to victory in this game. I mean, yes, it is a race, but okay, do I take this turn to try to stop my opponent from gaining amber, or am I just going to search for that amber myself? And I ran into a very strong, it was a Brobnar Sanctum deck, with this deck that I had no creatures in it. It was very frustrating for my opponent, because there was nothing for him to fight. There was nothing, you know, on the table, and I was just playing different actions and using different artifacts, and totally won that way. And so that could be a deck that's extremely effective against, say, one of those 2 Horsemen decks that's out there running around that everybody's so excited about. The game is extremely diverse, and it allows for a lot of different combinations. So domination isn't
one of the other aspects that can make the tournament play really, really interesting is KeyForge, more than any other game I've had the opportunity to work on, has the ability to function in multiple formats. Yes. There'll be formats where you have to bring 3 decks, or 2 decks, or any other combination. We've also been talking about, I don't know if you guys have heard of the adaptive format.
I'm really excited about adaptive.
Yeah, it's really interesting. The idea is that we'd both bring a deck, and then we'd play, and then we'd switch decks. And then based on that, so maybe you don't want to bring exactly the best deck. Maybe you want to bring something that's kind of mediocre, but you can still win with because you know it so well. And then if you guys go 1 for 1, you bid chains on who gets which deck on the third play.
I think the short answer to your question is there is no one best deck. So we're not worried about people going out and finding the one best deck. It's not out there.
Thank you.
Howdy, I'm Ned, and speaking of the Horsemen, I was just interested in the process behind designing the Horsemen, and also how you guys feel about the Horsemen after release.
So when Richard brought us the initial card file, the Horsemen were there, and we kind of immediately were really intrigued by the concept. We wanted to show some of what the algorithm can do, and like, we've obviously held some things back for future stuff, but the Horsemen are a great example of something you could only do in a game like KeyForge. It's a card that comes with 3 other cards. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so we went to play testing. They were tons of fun. We made some alterations, made some amazing art for them.
Yeah.
There was some definitely well, we had to figure out what horses looked like on the Crucible.
Yeah, and are they normal horsemen? Are they?
Yeah.
How do they fit with Sanctum? Who knows?
Lower implications of the Horsemen too. They're very out of character for Sanctum. So.
And so there was a lot of testing and working and making sure they fit well into Sanctum on that end. But then the game's released, and people seem to absolutely adore them, and that's fantastic. I still don't think they're the best decks out there. They have weaknesses. I mean, they're still creatures, and so they can be fragile on that end. Obviously, those double Horseman decks are pretty cool. But we did some testing internally with some double Horseman decks, and so I still feel good about where they're at overall. I think they're really cool, exciting, and I would take them as a tease for some of the potential of what this game can do.
Yeah, I was just wondering, should we expect to see stuff like this for the other houses in the future?
I mean,
if you mean just a cycle of 4 cards like that, probably not. If you mean other cool stuff, yes.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
The Horsemen are just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Jordan. First, I'm a big fan of FFG's products, from Twilight Imperium to L5R, all the way
Thank
down.
you.
Yeah, no, it's a great game. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All the way down to now KeyForge. My question's about future development. One of the things that I'm a little concerned about as like a avid buyer of these decks is future houses or mechanics or whatever invalidating earlier purchases, and kind of making first-gen decks and cards not good anymore. Is that a priority for development, or is that not really so much of a priority for whatever? You see what I'm asking. But
it's something we hear you, Jordan, 100%, and we want your purchase to be valuable for as long as humanly possible. That is something that we took as one of the core principles of what KeyForge is, and so we hear you 100%. We're going to do everything we can to make your purchases all matter.
Hi guys.
Hi.
First, I just want to say this game is really refreshing from a unique deck perspective. But it also kind of scares me a little because recently...
Me too.
Yeah. Recently, I actually was at a learner, I guess, event at a game shop, and I left one of my cards there. Thankfully, someone was able to, hey, we found this one. Is there a process that you guys have in place? Like, oh, well, I have this unique deck, this QR code. I lost this one. Can I replace it, or is my whole deck just gone?
Yeah, currently because of the manufacturing complexities that are involved with this, we don't have anything in place for that right now. And that also goes back to kind of the spirit of the game itself, with it being unique. There's not a good way for us just to go back in and duplicate it. That's not to say that that is completely ruled out in the future. As we get better at making it, that could be a possibility. But for right now, I would just encourage you guys, after every single game, stop, count your cards, make sure you didn't leave your house card, make sure that you didn't leave that card that somebody captured into their archive, and just count your cards at the end of every game. Just make it part of your routine, and that'll help save you a lot of trouble.
Okay,
It
great,
also-
thank you.
It also can really help if you flip your cards over, look at your card backs, see if you've gotten any of your opponent's cards, especially at a tournament. Also, I double sleeve my favorite decks.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, I was looking at the KeyForge app, and I was wondering, there's all these like third-party trackers and stuff. Is there any plan for the future for like an official one that doesn't look
Yes.
homemade?
So the Master Vault is something that is obviously right now it's in beta, but it is something that is going to evolve and hopefully will someday just be like the one-stop shop for KeyForge. We've got all kinds of things already that we're working on implementing right now. Just to give you a little bit of a tease of some of those things, being able to track your casual games as well as your competitive games. Obviously, you've got the coming soon things, so stats are going to be coming. That's all going to be linked into organized play. And we've purposely made it so that people can look at the software, or basically look at what is loaded into the Master Vault and then be able to extrapolate that information so that they can find that usable in the meantime. There's like no reason that we have to, make it so people can't do those things, and we want to make it so you guys can create fun communities for yourselves.
We're also super open to feedback. Please let us know how you're feeling. You get a great idea for a new feature, let us know about it. We want to work with the community and make this app a one-stop shop for KeyForge.
We're working on it, I promise. It's a thing.
The rules are currently available online at fantasyflightgames.com under KeyForge. It's got the quick start guide, the rules, and the PDFs for all of the short fiction as well.
Hi, so I'm glad you already talked about adaptive, so I don't have to try to explain it or anything, but it's already, I think, my favorite way to play the game. I love especially that it lets me play whatever deck I have. I can choose the deck that's the most fun to play or one that I haven't played much, and it's still a close game and everything. So my question is, first of all, what are your plans for big tournaments above store level? And second, are there any plans for big tournaments in adaptive format?
Can't speak too much beyond the Age of Discovery. Part of the Age of Discovery is to try out those formats, discover decks, and really get a sense of where the game is. One of the big things is it takes a little bit to wrap your head around this game and really understand where it is competitively. It's so different than anything that's come before you need that. And so we're really happy to have this period of time where organized play can focus solely on that. I wish I could talk more about it.
There's going to be tournaments. There's going to be tournaments. There's going to be big ones. There's going to be small ones. As far as what that is going to look like, right now, just focus on that Age of Discovery, and you'll be hearing a lot more information from Organized Play soon.
Hello, welcome to Philly. Go Birds. I have two quick questions, if that's well, one's a quick question, another if that's okay. First question, just going back to the double Horsemen and all. Were you anticipating this type of secondary market where decks are going for $2,000 if they're a double Horseman? Was that ever in your realm of thought?
Not in my wildest dreams, but it's amazing. The way the community has really embraced the game, I couldn't be more pleased. I mean, not that decks are going for that price, but more that people care that much. It's been really crazy. I mean, we've been talking about it around the office.
Yeah, even in the office, some crazy decks somebody gets, it's just, we all sort of celebrate that in awe. Makes me want to get more.
So around the office, how many decks do each of you guys have personally? Just a ballpark.
50 some.
So not all the decks from development. Okay. Well, how many fit in a quiver?
About 25.
I think I have like 23 because I have space for tokens.
I have 4. I keep giving mine away.
Yeah, I have 14. I gave one away, so I guess that's 13. Yeah.
All right, and then my second question in regards to the story and like all aspects regarding the Crucible and everything. Where are the inspirations coming from for the world and the factions and everything?
The short answer is stuff we thought was cool when we were 13. That's sort of one of our guiding
I still think
lights.
it's cool.
You know what? It still is cool. Richard Garfield actually handed off a pretty comprehensive set of cards that had a lot of implied theme and a lot of direction where he wanted us to take things. So that was our starting point, and we riffed around with that. And of course, we're pulling in all sorts of tropes from all across classic fantasy and science fiction. My kind of rule of thumb is you take a classic trope and then you kind of give it a little 90-degree twist to make it fit on the Crucible. Mm-hmm. So, take knights and angels and make them partly robots, and you're halfway there. But the old question of where do you get your ideas or where do you get your inspiration from is always impossible for a writer to answer, because the answer is literally everything.
I think one of the challenges for KeyForge was we wanted to create a universe, a world that could contain anything, and yet we also want to make each house distinct and unique. And so that comes to what Dan's talking about is finding those tropes and then twisting them.
And not just distinct and unique, but also feel like they all belong in the same game together.
Yep.
It's been a challenge. It's been a fun challenge.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how did the creative river flow, as it were, when you were creating the Crucible? Did the art influence the lore? Did the lore influence the art?
Yes. We started with some early notes from Richard Garfield, and I took those and worked with Andrew Navarro, our head of studio, and the rest of the team here and there, and did a couple of iterations of just basic concept stuff. And then once we had those sort of basically pitches for the factions written up and we were happy with them, the art team came in and worked with
David Kegg,
concept artist, and then
Shout
we
out to
started
him.
a lot of back and forth and refining the vision. So it flowed both ways.
Yeah. And that was so fun because once it was in art, between us and then David Kegg, who is just an amazing contributor, things just came up that we did not foresee, little just visual tropes, and we're like, oh, what could that be? And how does that work within the world? And what implications does that have for the house? So it just sort of organically evolved, because then we went back and you guys wrote art descriptions based on...
We did those initial 10 for each faction. I mean, then there's some really iconic pieces. I mean, you guys, Bad Penny?
Whoa.
Whoa, Bad Penny. One of the earliest art pieces we actually created, and if you haven't got the pin, you can go down and get a demo of KeyForge at the FFG booth in the exhibit hall and get a great Bad Penny pin. Or a Bad Penny, if you will. Ooh. But no, we had a lot of fun creating those initial 10 art descriptions for each faction and just kind of getting a chance to suddenly explore part of the Crucible.
Yeah, and then just see what happens and then respond to it.
Well, KeyForge took many years to develop, and so we really got time to put a lot of thought into the visual style, and Andy and Taylor were fantastic to work with.
All right.
Hi guys, first of all, thank you so much for doing this panel. This is really great for the KeyForge fans out there.
Our pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to.
So I have a few questions. One, there of course is an algorithm or algorithms that are going ahead and creating these decks. Going forward with the current set of cards that is out, is that algorithm continuing to evolve at all as you guys print more decks? I guess as a couple of examples of this, We've already talked about how there's some cards in the set that you'll only ever find one in a deck, like library access, bait and switch, and so forth. Are you guys finding more cards that you think you might limit to one per deck, as an example?
We are always adjusting the algorithm, especially as we see more and more feedback. That's important, to always be trying to improve. That's a big goal of mine, is that we keep pushing the game forward. We keep taking feedback. We keep improving, moving forward each and every time. So yes, I can't go into the specifics about what exactly we're doing, but again, it's always a goal to be improving that algorithm, because the algorithm is king.
I know there's, just as a follow-up to that, just crossed my mind, sacrificial altar is an example. There's a lot of people out there in the community talking about making sure they get at least one human in a deck with sacrificial altar. Is there anything I can bring back to the community to say, hey guys, they're working on it?
That's a wink.
Cool. So my last one. There's a whole lot of cards that have traits on them, on artifacts, on creatures, and very few of those actually get any gameplay. In other words, there's not any cards that affect those traits. I'm guessing there's things in the works.
So
thank you for your questions, but we can't give away all of our secrets. I mean, the architects are very mysterious on the Crucible.
Wait.
We appreciate the question.
One thing I can say, the traits do matter,
There you go.
but I can't tell you how.
Thank you.
Oh, right. I think.
Oh,
Hi.
okay.
So I'm coming from a different other end of the spectrum. So people here know the names of cards already. It's sacrificial bears and whatever. So I'm somebody. So this is going to be the other. So I played a few times yesterday and have had fun. I'm primarily a board gamer who always stayed away from CCGs and LCGs just because I don't have the time and energy to delve into that world. And so I think what you're doing here is brilliant in terms of, but I've always kind of been curious, and I've been intrigued, but I've just never played Magic. But this is going to bring in people like me who, like you said, can just pick up a deck and go. Of course, then I'm going to want to buy more decks. So it's kind of sneaky a little bit. But my question is, I'm interested, I haven't really heard much about Mr. Garfield and sort of his role at this point. What's the role, can you comment on, what's the role of the designer versus the development team with a game like this? I'm envisioning, did he pretty much just design the game and the rules, and then it's sort of off to the races for you all to continue to develop new cards, etc.?
That's a really good basic summary. Richard came to us with the game in one form, and we worked hand in hand with him. I was sending emails every other day back to Richard, being like, okay, we've been doing this, we're trying this, we're altering cards this way, constantly back and forth between the two of us. It was a very, very collaborative process to make sure we realized Richard's vision for what the game was.
Also true on the story and lore side of things as well. We were going back and forth with Mr. Garfield multiple times on the different iterations of the pitches for the different factions. For example, I know that he was very insistent that there be a strong sense of humor running through the game. So that was something that we were all trying to keep in mind. Like, how are Sanctum, Holy Knights, robot, cool guys also funny? Well,
I shall wear pants.
They're hilarious, but
not too funny.
Not too funny. Right. Like, it's
delicate balance.
True. Anyway, yes, it's ongoing, back and forth.
Hey guys, I'm just curious about what games did you grow up with and really enjoy, and if any of them slid their way into either the mechanics or into the art of KeyForge.
Oh man, so first inspirations that come to my mind is I grew up really liking roguelike games. They were a huge, huge part of my childhood growing up playing stuff like Rogue. And that sense, when I first heard about this game that we were doing it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a card game version of a roguelike game. And every time I go into a dungeon in a roguelike, it's like getting a new KeyForge deck. And so I was just so inspired by that. I just had to work on it. And well, it turned out I got to, so.
What about you, Andy? What about the art? it has a unique style to the art. It's very
Well, yeah, where the art style is concerned, I'm not so much. I grew up, like a lot of the games I played was Magic and Dungeons and Dragons, and then I was a big video gamer, so I played a lot of real-time strategy, but I think where I really started taking the deep dive into hours and hours of gameplay was in role-playing and like open world stuff, which I think also goes hand in hand with this game of the sense of discovery that happens. That's really what engages me, discovery and story. So I'm especially like drawn in by the kind of fiction that he's been writing and our team and Brad and Nate, and how that sort of enriches the world, and it infuses it with this sense of humor, but also gives context for what's going on. So I don't, as far as like the actual artistic style, it's just all about sort of honoring that sense of discovery and fun and action. So I don't know if I kind of indirectly answered that.
And you brought up the point of discovery, which I think is really a key factor of the game. You know, Richard has that lovely, how would you describe that, bit in the rule book where he's talking about his inspirations for the game in general and how discovery is at its core. KeyForge?
Sense of wonder.
Yeah, and this thing that, Andy, I thought you guys brought in so well to the art is, if you guys take a moment and look at some of your cards, there's so much to discover in each of those pieces, so much background detail that the art team has worked in, and it was marvelous. I have to give you kudos even here. Like, you guys did an amazing job.
Well, honestly, the artists brought more than I could have imagined. Like, we've worked with some incredible artists, so if any of them are listening, thank you for your work.
Thank you.
I couldn't have imagined some of the things they came up with. But that's the thing, is keeping it dynamic and engaging, and just something that you're excited to see what you open up with every deck. So.
All right, next.
Hey there. I have two questions. One's very easy. I'm curious, as a graphic designer, what the production process is from taking the file. I'm going to guess it's digitally printed and somehow put in a box and scanned and made sure it's unique and all that. And then the second question is, to get those designs together in a deck, or to get those cards mixed together in a deck, I imagine there's some sort of secret sauce that makes sure I'm not putting in these 8 cards together because it would ruin the deck if it's too powerful, and I'm making sure I'm not putting all these in because it would be really weak and it would never win. So
yeah,
is there some kind of like, each card contributes a few points towards a total and the computer makes sure it doesn't go over or above the total? So yeah,
not
production
exactly. So
questions.
I'm going to let somebody else handle the second question, but to go back to the first one about the graphic design, for those of you that don't know, I'm actually a graphic designer by trade, and I spent many years working with FFG working with all of the LCGs and whatnot. I did not actually get to work on KeyForge. We had an amazing graphic design team, kind of headed up by Christopher Hosch, and he's the one that like designed the logo and a lot of the things that are actually in the game, like the card frames and all that stuff. But that was a lot of iteration to kind of get to those points as far as like finalizing the designs, but there was a lot of strange design space that they had to work in. Going back to the actual production to get it made, we had to explore lots of different factories. We had to get away from the normal factory that we print our stuff at typically, just because of the extreme nature of the logistics behind putting these together, about getting the cards printed and all that other kind of stuff. The tolerances for bleed and all of that was very, very different. So there was a lot of like pushing and pulling with the production to get it made. But essentially the way that it works is you have the algorithm, it generates the deck as far as the contents and the code and everything that's supposed to be in that deck, and then another button is pressed and all of the things that create like your archon, like the arm and the head and the body, combined with the name and all of the cards that are going to be in there, and then the titles on the front and back, those things all get like smashed together using various scripts. And then it exports a PDF file of the deck itself, and then that gets sent off to the printer. So hopefully that answered your question.
Dark InDesign sorcery is how it's.
Yes, magic, witchcraft.
All right, so we are running short on time, so we have time for one more question.
Okay, well, this puts pressure on me, but I think one of my favorite innovations for the game is the fact that all the cards cost the same. There's no resources or cost curve or anything. I'm curious, how early in development was that found, and how did that affect other design choices?
The very first version I played had no costs on cards.
Yeah, the initial version that Richard gave us had no cost, and that was an important principle to build the game on. We wanted something that was easy to play, and the crux of every KeyForge turn is about that house decision. What house are you making your active house? So it's this very big decision that's followed by a bunch of small ones. And it creates this really compelling play pattern where you're just sitting there, you have all your options in your hand, you look at the board, you look at your hand, you make your choice, and then you go to town. And that moment after you make your choice and you get to start playing your cards and turning them sideways is so much fun. It's part of what I think is the most addictive part of KeyForge. It's just that pure moment of joy of getting to slam your cards out and
Martians.
To me, KeyForge is a game of tensions of like, do I want to develop my board, or do I want to use the board that's already in play? Do I want to use a creature to attack or use a creature to read? And the point of a cost on a card is to make it, make playing it not an auto decision, right? Like you have to actually think about whether or not you are willing to give up what it costs to play it. And so by that logic, in fact, every KeyForge card does have a cost. It's the opportunity cost of the other cards in your hand or on the table that you're not using because you've called this house instead of that house. So that's enough cost for the way the tensions are all built into this game.
In addition to the cards you may or may not be playing from your hand, meaning that you're at the opportunity cost of drawing other cards.
Right.
All right. So with that, I'm afraid we are just about out of time. So I would like to say thank you once again to our wonderful panelists for your time and your insight. Also, thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you for taking the time out of your day.
Thank all of you guys for being here.
If you have any more questions about KeyForge, you can check out our website at fantasyflightgames.com. And there you will also find our forums where you can interact with the KeyForge community and keep the conversation going. Have a wonderful PAX, everyone.
Thank you guys again.
Thanks for coming.